Hey everybody, this is Bevin. Welcome to Bevin, a femme over 40 and her friends podcast. I'm your host, Bevin. I've said my name 3 times. It's time to start the show. I'm really excited for you to meet AP Looze. They are just a fabulous artist, friend, explorer of the world that I met virtually. We've never actually met well, we were in the same place in person. We talk about that in this episode, but we haven't really met in person. And I'm excited that, through the goddess's internet, I'm able to connect with other weirdos like me out in the world and bring them to you. I am so grateful that you're here. Our three main resources we have are our time, talent, and our treasure. And you are giving some of that to me just through your attention. And I'm so grateful. For those of you out there who are astro nerds, like I am, AP is an Aquarius sun, Capricorn moon, Virgo rising. I'm a Virgo rising too. And their Mercury is in Capricorn, which is their chart ruler. AP is so cool. And just we got into an interesting DM discussion recently about like people just kind of trying on identities without actually having the embodied experience of an identity in the world. And I think there's a lot we get into that is relevant to these times and also just kind of a good exploration of the nuance of who and how you share your light in the world. And before we get started, I would love to tell you the best way to support this podcast is through my Patreon page, Patreon, patreon.com/FKDP, which stands for Fat Kid Dance Party, my aerobics class for anyone who feels left behind by mainstream fitness. If you've ever been called too much, too fat, or felt too awkward to dance, mine is the supportive class for you. It is weirdo drag performance, queer aerobics in its best, most flamboyant way and healing way. I'm very into the physiology of how to feel better in your body and how to embody your body in a more sustainable way and really how to regard yourself with love and grace. I also have a free blog, queerfatfemme.com, that I've been writing in for 16 years, so long. And I have this podcast. So, and I have a YouTube channel where I put all these podcasts. So there's a lot out there in the Bevin universe where I'm just giving myself because I want the world. I want people to just have access to the queer adults I didn't have access to when I was a kid. And yeah, there are so many ways to be a happy, successful adult. And that's really what this podcast is all about. It's just exploring that because we are raised with some really finite ways there are, I suppose, like just really like it's this way or that way, and that's it. But anyway, patreon.com/FKDP. I have on-demand videos available. I have some spiritual self-care lessons. I've been really called to teach about just how I practice my spirituality, which is very rooted in the earth and very rooted in ancestral traditions and reclaiming and imagination and self-trust. And I think self-trust and self-compassion are really how we get liberated in this cuckoo world that is just getting more and more bonkers. But you have a path to peace that's right in here. And I'm hopeful to be a light to help you get over there. So patreon.com/FKDP. You can also give me a one-time donation. There's info in the show notes about how to do that. And, just really would love to continue sustaining this work so that I can do more of it and reach more people. And I thank you so much for being here. And I hope you enjoy our conversation. AP, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, hi, Bevan.
I always like to start business in the front. Will you tell everyone what you offer and how people can work with you?
Well, primarily I'm an artist. Um, and in that realm, in terms of like if think physical objects that you might want, I've been making bags and I'm getting into making some tote bags. I also make flags, specifically queer flags and weird sort of custom things that the root of is always love. Um, and then I also offer Akashic readings. I do those online, FaceTime, in real life. I live in Minneapolis. Um, the best way to contact me for that is on my Instagram right now. Wahoolooze, WAHOOLOOZE. Ding.
It's so fun to say, wahoolooze.
That's been with me since middle school.
Wow.
It's like one of those, I probably used it as like my AOL instant messenger screen name,
Yes.
like seventh grade, and it never left.
As an unsupervised minor on the AOL streets.
Yes. Oh God. Uh, I
If
don't.
it's not on Instagram, how can they reach you?
Um, email? I don't know how else
I give
to.
you an email.
Do I want to put that out publicly? I don't know.
You're going to be a real estate agent. You do want to put it out publicly.
That's true. Also, I will be offering real estate services
Hmm?
very shortly
Certain
in
dreams.
Minnesota. Yeah, I'll throw my email address out there. I mean, it's exactly what it is. It's APLOOCE at gmail.com.
I'm just trying
Easy.
so hard as a human. Not trying. I don't like to say trying. I am working to extract myself from Zuckerberg as much as possible. Zuckerberger sucks. He doesn't want you to win, right? And so, like, I just want to really, I know a lot of people who listen to my podcast are not in the Zuckerberger universe. So, and I want them to be able to come see you because an Akashic Records reading, for folks who don't know, is like the Akashic Records are like a library of all of your lifetimes and all the lessons that all of your lifetimes have ever learned. And a reader can help, like, kind of go into the library that you have and help you make sense of this time and space that you're in now.
Yeah, and I perceive the Akashic record less of a library
Ooh.
and more as a sphere of consciousness, right?
Well, yeah.
I don't want to. I think when somebody first told me about the Akashic record, I was literally like, "Is it a book?" Like,
That's what it feels like.
I was like, "Where?" Like, I was just like, "Is it a magical spell book?" I have no idea. And that word record has really makes people fumble a little bit,
Yeah.
in terms of like what I'm doing. And I would say, like, living in the Midwest and in Minneapolis, it's like people don't know what it is. It's like a complete mystery. And so I feel like I've been this sort of Akashic evangelizer in my art and in my life. And it's just been like, I feel like the coasts, people are like, oh, yeah, like, especially the West Coast and California. It's like, definitely, like, there's probably some celebrities who have their like spiritual guru Akashic record reader, and people here are like, what the hell is that? Like, I've never heard of that. And there's something kind of funny about being in the Midwest that I really love. That's like we're not like up to date on stuff the way we're not the cutting edge, but there's this sort of like this root of something. Um, and it's not really the ignorance, but it's sort of like when something reaches a geographic area later, it's like changed and done something else by the time it's gotten there.
Mhm.
And so it spreads differently. It spreads in a more grassroots kind of way. And it's been spreading through my art practice. Um, and I don't have like any competition in terms of like if I'm thinking of it as a business, that I don't really know anyone else kind of like overtly offering this. Um, and it's a little odd. Like I don't have like I mean, I have some core people who I can talk to about this who are involved in the records, but maybe don't offer it as a service. Um, it's just interesting because I feel like, maybe if I was in LA, there'd be like 30 or 40 people that would be like offering this. And I don't know what it's like. I've never been to LA. Like, I don't think I have any interest in going there.
Fine. It's interesting because I don't even think people in LA necessarily know what the Akashic records are, but they're certainly more like crystals and incense and
Sure.
smudging, right? Like, and I think there's something. I'm a records practitioner who doesn't offer that as part of my work, but it certainly informs my work. And do you remember the computer game Myst? MYST?
Yes.
Okay.
I
When I ask my records what they look like, I'm like in a quote library, but like I don't see any books. I see it's literally like a scene from Mist with like a
Yep,
crystal ball on a purple table. And like
yep, yep.
it's just like a place of metaphysical connection. Like Akasha is like the fifth element, like all that is fire, air, water, earth, spirit, right? Like, and so it's just, and then they called it records. Leah Garza, our mutual teacher, how we met, was in her Akashic mentorship. And she said if it was invented now, they would have called it probably downloads or something like that. It's just a method of like getting information, right? And so that's why they called it records. But
The when you said fifth element, something that I have been pondering since my grandmother's death this fall, is wondering why light is not an element. We have fire. Well, why isn't light or color? Why is that not an element? That is such a profound part of being alive.
mhm.
And we use it as a measuring stick of speed. And like we like pro or photons don't necessarily have mass, but they have don't they have to in order to exist? Like anyway, there's this thing about like when I think about mysticism and when I think about the Akasha, I think about the ability to see with a capital S
Yeah.
and how it's about seeing between things, through things, above things, around things, calling things together and seeing their connection. And I think this, um, to me, for me personally, it's connected to my lineage. And um, I just was like so perplexed after my grandma died as to why we don't consider light and color an element. I it's so beautiful. Like it's such a phenomenon that is so deeply embedded in our lives. And it's like my art is exceptionally colorful. Like if I turn the camera toward my studio, it's like it's a bit comical because I have like a seam or a thread nippers that's on a bright yellow or a bright pink string around my neck. And I set it down and I made it a bright color with the intention of being able to see it. And it gets lost in all of my neon colors. Like, I have like thread sitting here that's like, um, but I think I've been feeling this like this is sort of like about the records, about color, about death, about ancestry, but like what happens when a family member dies? What gets released? What wisdom is perhaps more accessible now that it's not in that person's body? And after she died, I went around her house um, and photographed myself in every single one of the rooms of her house. Because there's something very special about it. She lived there since the 60s. She lived there alone from 1980 onward. And there was something like it was preserved in time. It was like holding the essence of the family in a way. It just felt like this sort of time capsule. And like my dad's bedroom hadn't changed until somewhat recently because of a pipe bursting. But I took all of these photos of myself, like over 400 of them, and I turned it into this video of like moving around her house. And this, it's like cameras capture light. That is their magic. They, it's like when you look at it from older cameras, it's like a chemical reaction with light. Like, how is that not an element? Please explain. And then an image appears. It's magic. Like light is magic. And also within like a photograph, it's a shutter speed. So it's capturing a moment of time. It might be capturing 1/60th of a second, 1/60th of a second of light. So that image is not a still image. It is 1/60th of a second. And what universe exists inside of that photograph? What amount of light exists in that photograph? I've just been obsessed with this lately because like photography is a big part of my family. And my grandfather got this camera when he was stationed in Japan during the Korean War. He was a doctor, and he would take all these pictures of my grandma when he was there. And I inherited his camera.
Mhm.
He died in 1970. That's a whole other story. But I was taking self portraits of myself wearing my grandmother's clothing. And I was with that camera. And I was like, I'm seeing the way my grandfather saw through this camera. And I'm focusing on me wearing my grandmother's clothing. I'm embodying both of my ancestors at the same time. And it's coming through sight. And there's just this like other part of my family too, where almost everyone has blue eyes, which are notoriously more sensitive to light. And I had a great aunt who was a nun for 70 years. Her name was, we called her Great Aunt Myrrh, but she also went by Sister Anne Christine. And later in life, she wanted to be called Chris. And she wanted her breasts removed. And she said she wanted to become a pastor or a priest. And when people said, well, you can't do that because you're a woman, she had a newspaper article about Renee Richards, who was a transgender tennis player at the time, and would say, well, if she can do it, I can too. So she was trans, essentially, and she always wore sunglasses, always, even in like professional portraits, sunglasses. And I only saw her eyes once in my life, once. And they're very, very light blue. But it got me thinking about sensitivity to light. And when you put sunglasses on, it actually allows you to perceive light more clearly with unencumbered from its brightness. So you can see through the light. And your pupils are also more dilated behind sunglasses. So you're actually letting in more information. Anyway, I've been thinking a lot about this. It sounds a little nutty, but in this experience of my grandmother dying, I would open the record and it was like I saw from inside the sinew of the ancestry itself. It was less about individual people and it was pointing at the interconnectedness that we seem to have lost track of. And so I had this vision of being inside my grandmother's house, and I asked, what is this place? And the record said, this is the heart of your family. And I would walk into these rooms of the home, and I knew immediately when I would walk in, I was like, oh, this is my cousin's heart. This is my sister's heart. This is my father's heart. And I felt such an overwhelming sense of like unconditional love. And I just felt like I, the Akasha has sort of, and through that mentorship that we were in, sort of revealed this like, what's my capital R role in the family? Like, not lowercase r role of like scapegoat or black sheep or,
Rainbow
you know,
sheep.
yeah, like what's the liberated role here? And I was like, oh, the record is like you are the seer of the family.
Mm.
You hold the imagination of the family. And so how does one hold that responsibly and with great care? Because I can't just go like, hey mom, hey dad, I'm the seer of the family. Like what the hell? Like how do you translate that mysticism into a real life interaction? And I did a family constellation here in Minneapolis, um, with horses. And I was told your role in this life is to be the example of love. Be the example of love. That it doesn't mean pontificating. It doesn't mean being didactic. It doesn't mean speaking above someone and saying you know everything about love. No, no, no. It's about seeing people. It's about relationship. It's about embodiment to me. Love is the most accessible when I'm embodied, when I know I'm here, when I'm present. And someone who I'm very close to said to me that like when they visited their dad, which was a whole ordeal, that they were like, my one goal was to stay in my body. That was it. And so then what happens as a result of that very simple task? Connection. And like staying in your body is an example of love. And I'm not saying that like that's a given in any given moment. We live in an extremely traumatizing world. And, but when I'm like, I just know that like when I know I have the capacity to be in my body and I choose that, something changes. And like my family, I think most people's bio families, you like pop off like something, you flip your lid, you're gone. Like at my grandmother's memorial, and I carried this person's idea with me, just stay, what if you just stayed in your body? I was like, okay. Was going offline. There was all this stuff happening, and I froze and I was like, I want to leave. I'm going to depart. I'm going to abandon this, which is a pattern within my family. And I said no. I was able to access something within me. I was able to access my agency, even within a triggered state. I decided, no, I am not going to be triggered like this. And I just got up out of my chair and just started walking around. I just walked around. I said hello to people. I ate pie. I talked with people I'd never met before. And I'm not saying this is always possible. It's not. It is not. I'm not here to say, like, if you're just strong enough, you can just get out of it. But I think, like, there's something that happened within this Akashic mentorship and within a very deep emotional meltdown that occurred as a result of potentially being in that mentorship, um, was like, wait a second. I don't have to hold on to any story I've held of myself. I don't. And colonialism, and even the way that psychological advice is given within colonialism, is that there's sort of this idea that we're in these fixed states, that like if you've experienced complex PTSD or PTSD, you're just going to be in this rut or whatever, and you're going to have to manage your triggers. And yes, true, completely true. And I do think it can be a door. Like your trigger can be a door. Your trigger can be a gold mine. Your trigger can be a path of learning about yourself and about how to advocate for yourself and ask for a different world of how to connect with people that is outside of the paradigm of a colonial, very fixed state, fixed identity way of being. And it requires, though, presence, and it requires love. Like, in order to transform those triggers and sit with them and be with them, they need to be held by you if you have the capacity to, but by others close to you. We're not meant to hold our trauma alone. No. And we've been spoon fed this idea that we should somehow transcend it, or not transcend it, but that, like, well, if we work on it by ourselves and we go to individual therapy and learn about these triggers, I really feel like the only way that they move or change is in loving relationship. That doesn't mean a partnership. It could be friendships. It could be even someone who sees you in a community, like somebody who maybe you don't even know very well, who like sees you hurting and arrives to you. It doesn't require like intimate partnership. And I think that's also kind of this thing that's been happening within attachment theory stuff, where it's like, oh, you heal through relationships. So everybody's like, well, it should be in my monogamous partnership that all of this healing is happening. And it's like, no, 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 no. It must be diffused. And so this is when I come back to presence. It's like the stronger the relationships you have with people, the healthier we become. And when I say presence too, I'm also talking about vulnerability. And I think what I'm coming to understand is that vulnerability isn't necessarily like, I think it's misconstrued. It's sort of like, oh, if I bear this thing that I went through, like, oh, you wouldn't believe it. I was in this horrifying car accident. I don't know. I'm just kind of using a non very personal example. Um, that's a fact, and it is vulnerable to share that. I think I'm getting into the root of when vulnerability touches on our deepest fears, when it touches on our deepest passions, our deepest joys, when we're willing to admit what we desire. It is so vulnerable to name what we desire. But vulnerability goes hand in hand with truth. If you're lying, you're not vulnerable. And I just keep coming back to, like, I don't know, like, the more honest we are with ourselves and with other people, and the less we choose to protect ourselves and requires love, the deeper the relationships become. The more trust can be built, the more honest it is. And sometimes we don't even understand when we're being dishonest because it's hidden under a layer of protection. Anyway, this has sort of been my.
I love artists because it's like this, like the hyperfixation, like what I've been thinking about, what I've been going through, right? Vulnerability can't exist without risk, right? And I think being an artist,
Yes.
taking continual risks and in public for other people's consumption and connection. Um, AP, I'd love to. Well, first of all, when we're talking about the elements, I love color and light. I would also posit sound, because sound healing is so profoundly effective on human bodies and nature and creatures.
Senses,
Hmm.
our sensuousness.
Hmm. Yeah,
That's what this is about.
yeah, sensuousness. And
But
for those who are just listening, we're making a beautiful, like, kind of grabby finger pull, which I think, now that this feels more gay. I would love to ask you about your coming out story and like what it was like for you to unfold the rainbow sheep of your family.
oh my God, this is such a good story. Well, all through high school, well, I got in trouble in middle school for trying to facilitate the day of silence. I'm not sure if that's still a thing. Are you familiar with this, Bevan?
Hey, no, explain because I don't think I remember.
So what it was this so you this was back in the early 2000s, and the Day of Silence was a day where people, either queer or allied with queer people, would take a vow of silence for a day
Right.
as sort of a symbol of the silence that queer people have, or being in the closet or whatever. So it sort of became this like silent protest in school. And it was more popular in high schools, but I had a friend who had a older sister who taught her about it. And so she took a vow of silence that day. And so people would harass her, why aren't you talking? Like, oh, you like gay people or whatever. And
Yes.
I know, yeah. So, and I was attracted to this, not really understanding why. I was like, oh, the Day of Silence, like what?
Oh,
So
the biggest allies sometimes come out.
I know I
Biggest
was the biggest ally.
yes.
Biggest,
Me too. I was outside the gay prom, like waving counter protest signs because I wasn't yet like feeling safe enough to come out.
oh my God,
I know.
you
So
know.
I'm grateful to be this gay now.
Yes. So there was an understanding in me. Okay, so well, the Day of Silence, got in trouble. This A couple of my friends and I had put up little posters around the school being like, ask us about the Day of Silence. We got called into the cafeteria by our principal. I still know his name and I know where he works, at a different school. But he sat us down and essentially said because we hadn't received teacher approval that we weren't allowed to do this. And so,
Well, they're so authoritarian. I just want to say that. Like, I remember feeling very intimidated by teachers and like professors. And this went well into my 20s and 30s. And then I had a friend who became a Yale professor. And I was like, she is objectively still a fuck up. And
yeah,
like tenured Yale professor. I'm like I'm just they're just humans. And like the authority trauma is just to teach you to bow down to authority. It's colonization. Anyway.
right. And I felt so ashamed. And I felt like I was in trouble. And I was like, oh my God.
Coded. You were coded to feel that way because someone
Yes.
authority was dressing you down.
Yes. And I was called out of class, you know, to be brought to this empty cafeteria at the end of the day to sit down with these other people to talk about it. And then, I learned more about the Day of Silence when I got to high school. And it was actually a really big deal because I lived in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, which is in northwestern Wisconsin. It's sort of the largest city within many miles. Minneapolis is the closest metropolitan area. And on the Day of Silence, people would bring burning crosses to the school and be like, homo sex is a sin. And so
Okay, I also just want to question, like, who came up with the idea to burn a cross? It's like your most sacred symbol
I
of
have no
the
idea.
sacrifice of Jesus, and you're going to burn your most sacred symbol
I
in
know.
protest of what someone else is doing. That is not what Jesus would do. Okay, keep going.
No, no, I know. And so then something else happened in our school. Oh, what was it called? It was the counter protest of the Day of Silence, which was the Day of Truth. So then all the evangelical Christians the following day would take a vow of silence.
They're such babies. These
And they
straight
had
gay
t-shirts. They had
babies.
t-shirts.
Ah,
Um, so it was not, I knew, it was, really rough road,
hmm.
for me in my coming out on an internal level. And I think the first person that I ever said anything to was a high school English teacher. And I didn't even say I was gay. I said, I know I'm not straight, which was pointing to something deeper about gender that I couldn't even put a finger on.
Yeah.
But when I was in seventh grade, though, I was waiting in the orthodontics office, and there was a Teen People magazine, and this from 2002 probably. That was an article about probably somebody named Kaden, who was a girl who wanted to be a boy, and they had top surgery. They had gone on hormones, and I was reading this article being like, wait, like I only thought you could go from man to woman. Like in the public domain, that was the understood direction of transness that I had access to at some level. I don't know where or how. So it was mind blowing to me to understand that you could go from girl to boy. Like,
I also want to say there's like two teaching moments out of this too. Number one, it's the way in which the patriarchy plays into what's available, because
yes,
surgeries available for male to female transition are incredibly advanced because men in the workplace can make more money than women in the workplace. And so therefore there's more money to pay for these surgeries, right?
yes.
And then second of all, you don't know what you can have until you know what's available. Like I didn't even know gay was the thing you could be until I was 14 years young. Like Melissa Etheridge wasn't out yet. Ellen wasn't out yet. Like no one was out there telling me what was possible.
You
And
didn't have an example.
yeah, and that's why media is so essential and so important. And like the thing that gives me so much hope in these really wild times to be a gay or a trans or anybody in the rainbow, right? Like anybody out here, like it's the culture is really, I think, what is creating what's possible more than the government, which is of course like still like traumatizing and obnoxious and like horrifying, right? But like we still exist, we have always existed, and we always have each other.
Right. Yes. And I want to like bookmark a thing. I want to return to that.
Okay.
The particularly the pride flag. I want to come.
Yeah.
Um, but okay, coming out. So I expressed this to this teacher, like I'm not straight. And I when I told her this, she's like, you need to break up with your boyfriend. Like, and so
Give
I
it a
broke
boyfriend.
I, I broke up with him at like 2 a.m. over instant messenger.
From wahoolooze.
Ugh.
Super minor, 2
I
a.m.
still feel bad about it. I feel bad.
You know what? We're always doing the best we can with the tools.
Yes, as a
Time.
18-year-old, I did the best I could. So then I went to college.
For those of you who are like young enough to not know what AOL Instant Messenger did, it was like this little box in the corner of your computer, and you like type to your friends constantly because we didn't have text messaging yet.
No, no, and you know, you might have dial up, so and you might have a time limit because your parents were like, internet costs money, like per minute, so time limit.
It used to be like buying gas, and now it's just freely available. The same thing with cell phone minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
You have
used
to
to,
talk at night.
yes, one of my first like substantial queer relationships, the person I was dating, um, didn't really have enough money to pay their phone bill, so every time I would text them, I would give them a quarter.
That's great. Like, I need to communicate with you. Here's
Because
my
it was like text, it would be an individual, it would be a cost per text.
yes. Oh man, kids these days.
I know, you don't have any idea.
They chat. They text the weirdest and longest and shortest things. Anyway, okay, keep going. So you're 18, breaking up with
18,
your boyfriend.
yep, and I go to college and I meet a trans masculine person. And I was like, what? Like it was sort of like I remember just being like allured, like, okay. And um that was sort of like a little doorway into queerness that I hadn't experienced before. Because this person had come out in high school and like was in queer relationships in high school, and I was like, what? And I think I came out as probably bi on a drunken evening in someone's dorm room. Yeah, classic. And then
It's like a stop on the queer railroad. Like
yes, it is, and it also like it is legitimate. I think like
because you're like, I don't know, but this seems like a place, and like maybe I like this stop on the railroad, and then eventually you're like, yes, this is definitely me, or actually I need to get back on the train.
right, exactly. And so came out as bi, LOL, and then I kind of met some of this person's friends and like really fell head over heels for someone and really put on the term dyke
Hmm.
and butch, like really was like, oh, we're going butch here. And
Did Butch ever feel like home to you?
did butch ever feel like home?
Yeah.
Yes, it did for a period of time. Um, but it it sort of wore off, or like I got kind of confused because I feel like this has loosened so much, but like back in like 2008 to 2010 or whatever, when I was really in the murk of like the coming out stuff, like there's still like within queerness like this like butch femme thing going on.
Mhm.
And there were people that I was meeting who were like going on hormones and then going off and claiming a more like feminine masculinity, but it was always being framed within the context of these two distinct like places to be. And I think I just was like, well, I'm not femme, like in like the way that I'm seeing it, and I'm not butch, and like I'm not I that doesn't feel like me either. So I remember at FemCon in 2010 that I think you were also at,
Definitely. Yeah.
I was I felt too butch to be there,
Oh,
but
really?
not but not butch enough to be with the butches who were
Because
like,
there were Butches at the con. Like,
no, and I was like, I don't know, I don't. So I just ended up smoking a lot of cigarettes outside of the hotel, just being like, I don't know where I belong.
oh, I wish I had found you. I don't know what I would love to, but I like I my favorite is the people who feel outsiders amongst the outsiders, like
Yes,
I just want to
yes,
gather people and just be like, you are exactly okay being one of one. And like identity politics is like I like to think of it as how the Catholic idea of like hell has purgatory, right? And like I just think it's like that healing space outside of mainstream society is like identities, but really like we're all one, like oneness. And so it's like the incredible uniqueness that we each have is like, I don't know, what we have together.
absolutely. And I think when you're like very young and impressionable, you're really trying to figure out where you fit.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of policing that happens.
And especially in 2010. Like I think in
Oh my God, it was out of control.
we did not yet have like I don't think anyone was using non-binary, you know what I mean? Or at least like it wasn't common. And like
There
we
was the
weren't
term.
yes. And I think there was like an understanding that femme needed to be more expansive than had been expressed, but we hadn't yet like done that. Um,
Right.
but we had Dorothy Allison, who was like, she was our keynote speaker that year, and she was anchoring us in like having a lacy bra peeking out from a flannel shirt because you kind of had just had to lightly code femme, but you couldn't be accepted as a femme, right? Like back
Yep.
20 years before that. So like 30 years before that. Like it's just amazing how like we just have to keep evolving to love one another more and more and more. Just kind of like what you
Exactly.
talked
It's
about
to
with your
come
family.
back to what I was talking
Yeah,
about.
exactly.
And it's about being present. And when you're constantly policed about your identity, how the fuck can you be present?
Yes, and I like to say this is something I say in my lesbian community is like I am a sister, not a cop. And so I think, just being a sibling, not a cop, like anywhere you are, whether it's in queer spaces or not, just like be a sibling, not a cop. Like,
Absolutely. Well, and then to get like the coming out stuff, like I like so there was the dyke moment in my life, and then there was the like there was which was actually very brief. It was very short. It was only maybe like a year and a half. And then the trans thing became really big in me. And I was like, "Oh my God." And prior to coming out as trans, I was at my parents' house and we had gone out for my sister's birthday or whatever. This is Wisconsin, so there's a lot of alcohol involved. I'm now sober, almost 10 years, but I um was definitely drunk during this experience. And after dinner, my sister went to bed and I was sitting across from my dad in the living room. And he was saying his favorite little phrase, "I'm right about everything." That's what
oh,
he said. And I was like, "Okay, Dad, tell me something you're right about me." And he just looked at me drunk and he said, "You're gay. We've known since you were 3." I never talked to them about it. He just was like, "You're gay. We knew something was going on when you were really young. We knew." And my mom kind of missed this exchange and she came in and she's like, "Oh, did I miss something?" I was like, "Yeah, Dad basically just came out to me about me being gay." And then she said, "Well, are you thinking about transitioning?" And I was like, "No," even though I'm like, "Yes." And because she knew I was like hanging out with some trans people. And uh so then when I did come out as trans, I don't know. I
God will give you the path of least resistance. Like I was so afraid to come out. And then I got a girlfriend and I was like, Buddy the Elf, I'm in love and I don't care who knows it. You know what I mean? Like it was so easy. Your parents outed you to you.
I know, it's really
Oh,
funny. And then I remember asking my dad, maybe before that happened, I asked him, like, "Did you ever want a boy?" And he started like getting kind of teary-eyed and he said, "I just always wanted my kids to be whatever they wanted to be." And there's been hard stuff about being trans with them for sure. Um, and I think my mom kind of had a harder time with it when I actually came out. And I used genderqueer and they them immediately. It was not even there was no he him in my little journey. A lot of people assumed when I changed my name that I wanted to go by he him, and I was like, "No, I don't." Um, and so I used and still use the term genderqueer. And trans. I think I've used non-binary when that's the only option I have in like a drop-down menu, but I don't want to be defined by what I'm not. Genderqueer is a different word. It's a different world, right? And when you say non-binary, like that's not even fun to say. That's like I don't want to like no shade to anyone who claims that term, but I'm like, do you like that word? Like does it feel good in your mouth? Like does it sound good, liberatory? Or is it just sort of like well, I'm just not that. I'm not that. Or maybe there is something powerful about saying like I'm not that. Like I said, I'm not straight. Um, but it's sort of I just sort of get a little lost then. in what it is. And maybe that's also the point. It's
I
a
mean,
little messy.
I think there's like it's both and like you can be gender full or not gendering. You know what I mean? And I know people who are very much on not that anything's really a spectrum, it's all a universe, right? Like even when I talk about like the train with the bisexual stuff, like actually it's more like a spaceship, you know, and like you're just like figuring out who you are in this world in this ever evolving meat sack that's gonna that your soft animal of your body's gonna love what it loves, you know? And like for me, like queer and bisexual are not the same thing. And
No.
it's not. I very much do not identify as bisexual. I am far more queer. I like queer because it's just a political identity. And first of all, I think I want to talk to you about this actually. Like, I just feel so rooted in like the ancestry of the fact that queer and trans people have always existed. And we've always been in resistance to the dominant culture and have had
Yes.
to carve out spaces of love and family as our
Yes.
birth families do not create space for us to be who we are, right? And
Correct.
like, so I'm curious for you, like, what are, because it's so different to have like 20 something years of lived queer adulthood where you felt vulnerable because of who you're holding hands with.
Yes.
If other people
Yes.
are claiming identities just out of the air, and I'm glad that it's available to them now, and yet do not and probably won't ever have the experience of feeling vulnerable because of who they're holding hands with. So
Correct.
I'm throwing this at you. Like, what do you think people need to know and root themselves into to be in integrity as a queer person?
Yes. Integrity. Oh my God. So something I've been reflecting on recently, and as you know, I shared in my story, like I came out as a dyke soon after high school. I think I dated like two cis men in high school for a total of what, 6 months of my life. I have never had the privilege of hiding inside of a cis het anything ever. I don't know what that feels like. I literally don't. But I see it happening around me. And I think, you know, one of the things that happened when I came out, and you were talking about it with media, is like the reason why I started reading about and consuming queer media was because I didn't have an example around me of what that looked like. I didn't understand what I was. So I needed information about it. And then ultimately, you know, you stumble across all of the history and you stumble across like Act Up, you stumble across like Sylvia Rivera. And like, I'm not saying stumble across, but like there's sort of a moment where you like open the door and you're like, what? Like, hold on a second here. And I feel like I had a really good friend who was just deeply educated in queerness and was sort of like my fairy godparent in this and like took me on that journey with him in a really profound and beautiful way. And he would say like, "Oh, we should watch this documentary together." And we'd, you know, watch something, discuss it. He taught me about Derek Jarman. He taught me about um uh the oh, what was it? It was pre-Stonewall. It was in the Tenderloin, the cafeteria, the something cafeteria riots
Yes.
that happened in the Tenderloin. Screaming Queens, that's the documentary.
Yeah.
Um, and then like being exposed to like queer and trans musicians, and it was like, oh my God. And at that time, it was still quite fringe to be out as trans. And so the community around it was very distinct. It was very like, this is the safe group of people to be with. And it was very clear. And it was a very shared experience of that vulnerability. And like there was the the queer Avengers here in Minneapolis did a lot of activism. Um, I wasn't really a part of it, but I was always like sort of 1 degree away. And like I remember being harassed like a lot in public. Um, in my very blurry, very gender ambiguous time, pre-hormones, pre-top surgery. Um, and got kicked out of bathrooms left and right. Was told like, if you want to be a man, or like, um, just lots of other, or like being hit on inappropriately by like, an ice cream truck driver who's like thinking I'm like it's just like pretty constant, and it's funny. I think I've come back to a bit of an ambiguousness in my gender, and it's causing some confusion again for people. But um there's this way that when you live the vulnerable experience of queerness, your nervous system responds to that in a really distinct way. It's very embodied. You understand when you're safe and you're not safe. You understand who the safe people are to go to. You understand, for instance, in the real estate office that I just visited, who is the safe person to ask about queerness in the office. And you just do this thing, you look around and you're like, it's that person. And you know immediately. I don't, and so there's this thing where you police yourself a little bit in certain situations because you don't know what could happen. It might be an offhanded remark. It might be an overt remark. It might be something that makes you feel unsettled and unsafe. And so you learn to kind of like do a little shape shifting to accommodate for that safety. And that's the embodied part that I'm talking about. You read. And there's this thing, and communities have been built around that sense of safety and lived experience. And there are certain people who I can, like trans people in particular, especially medically transitioned people, um, or hormone, whatever, any sort of medical intervention that makes you appear very different than the norm. And those are where those really rich conversations happen for me. T for T conversations, where you're like, you can say very simply, like, oh, I didn't feel safe there. Like, oh my God, yeah, do not, I've been there before, terrible place to go. Don't ever go there again. Like, maybe it's a therapist or a doctor or a particular restaurant or venue or whatever. You learn, you sort of have this like grassroots word of mouth situation that emerges of like where safety is. And there's I'm so glad that non-binary identities are accessible to people, because like, yeah, no one wants to be put in a box. No, it sucks. It sucks big time because it's attached to control and power. Um, but there's something though where when this word queer is being used, or when people claim that with identities that are not, it's like there's, if you're not taking hormones and you're using they them and you're in a cis het appearing relationship, there's no, you don't have to think about these things. Your body is not actually attuned to that safety thing. And so I think I don't want to say that queerness is sort of predicated on having experienced trauma or hurt or harm, but there's a way that this word is sort of being used, queerness and non-binary, without educating oneself about the history of this universe and why it is the way it is and why you now have access to this type of of embodiment of gender, it didn't just come out of thin air. Okay. It came out of a long line of history of people literally dying and like being incarcerated, of being murdered. It's like this is not just some cool fashion thing. And I think there's something that's like, someone said to me recently, she said, I don't know her, she was at the real estate office. And she said to me, I asked her, so what's the queer vibe in this office? And she was a millennial. And that's why I was like, I think you're the safest person to talk to. And she's like, well, it's really gay. It's gay. And I was like, wait, no, no, no. I said queer. And I'm going to be more specific. What about trans? Are there trans people who work here? And she was like, I don't know if anyone's out or not, but yeah, like it's gay. And then she said, I'm not blessed enough to be gay. Like it's so cool to be gay. And
I mean,
I
she's
know,
right,
but it's like, wait, what? Like that is how we're framing this, that it's cool. And it's like, to me, queerness is really not an identity. It's not. And I mean, it is within the context of colonialism. You really can't escape it very easily. But I think there's, when I've talked to some people who are non-binary, and I'm like, wait, but have you read any books about being queer? Like, and they're like, no, I haven't. I'm like, why? And I can't answer it. And in the back of my mind, it's like, it's because you don't have to. Because you're not moving through the world in a way that I do, where I had to educate myself. And there's sort of this like there's this blindness or ignorance, that's sort of like living inside of this non-binary thing. Not in everyone, I'm not saying that, but there is something going on where I sometimes feel a stark divide between the people I can safely talk about queerness with and the people I can't, who are still claiming the same word. And it gets confusing. And it actually distorts my sense of safety, because I have been deeply harmed by people who are claiming this word and saying really homophobic things to me, and without realizing that they're saying it, because it's not embodied. And to come back to like queerness not being necessarily an identity, it's a way of life. It's an energy. It's about liberation. And I think when we categorize it into identities, we're actually like severing ourselves from the possibility of what queerness can even be. And so it just gets confusing when there's queerness existing in some pretty het environments. I'm like, what's going on? Can someone explain this to me? I'm so confused. I feel very confused and unsafe in those spaces. And I feel, and I'm suddenly outed again. I'm like outside of belonging when those kinds of things occur. And I'm like, wait, but what the hell is going on? I feel like it can feel like mockery, and again, it's like my body knows that that's not a safe environment for my queerness. And I'm like, what are we doing? And like, and I think there is just this distinct difference that I'm feeling right now too, where like in our current world, there are non-binary people who have never taken hormones, never had a surgery, have never pursued a gender marker change. And those people have the ability now to hide within het cis stuff, privilege. Like, I was literally told this morning by my therapist, you should consider not flying anywhere right now because of your gender. And because the state doesn't approve of me. The state thinks I'm a fraud. And like, I don't know. And sometimes I think that's like when that privilege or that right, it's not even a privilege, when that right is being taken away from me. And I do sort of claim genderqueer non-binary, but it's in a different experience than somebody who's never pursued these changes. And it's not to delegitimize that person's queerness at all, but there's sort of this like really deep lack of understanding of what's going on for me versus what's going on for them because they don't even have to think about it. You know, I'm like, oh, gotta go to the Social Security office. Oh, fuck, I can't change my gender marker there. Now I have to like change my birth certificate. Oh, God, I can't figure that out in time. Oh, that's going to cost $350. Fuck. Well, now my driver's license, and now that's going to take like 6 weeks to come in the mail. So I might not even be able to change my gender on my birth certificate. And it's like claiming non-binary in that body that's not been medically changed in any way versus mine. There's just such a stark divide right now. Stark. And it can feel really hard. How do I want to say this? It can feel really hard. Just feels really hard. It just feels really hard. I don't know how else to say it. And again, I was I guess I'll say this though. I was talking to, I think some people perceive what I'm talking about as gatekeeping. That like you're not queer enough or whatever. And a friend of mine said the most beautiful thing. He's like, it's not gatekeeping, it's gate tending.
Mhm.
It's tending to this very sacred space. And like, I imagined when he said this, like the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence being the tenders of this space. And I'm like, you know, I said this to someone who doesn't know queer history. He's like, who are they? And I'm like, huh, like,
A worthy Google. And they have a
oh my God, please.
just a worthy Google. I mean, I think a lot of what you're talking about too is just privilege, just the basics of knowing you're in a privileged position. Educate yourself. Like there's media, right? Like there are great documentaries. And I'm not talking about watching a lesbian Hallmark movie starring two straight women. I'm talking about watching The Celluloid Closet. Like I'm talking about like what it like maybe Paris is Burning because it's a good reflection, but there's a lot of complicated history around that movie. But like, you know, The Screaming Queens, all of these great pieces of art that our great artists have made for us, right? So education, listening, just listening to people, compassion, you know, when your trans friend says it's hard, believe them, have compassion for them, and then do
Exactly. Or if they say that hurt me,
yeah,
be like, oh shit, I'm sorry.
yeah.
Like, I think people are so afraid of like being transphobic or homophobic, like, especially the people who are sort of like in this non-binary place or whatever, that like hurt becomes really distorted because people are so afraid of being perceived as bad
Mhm.
and will do anything to defend themselves, but it ultimately diminishes the pain of the person experiencing the harm.
Mhm.
So it's about not it's about humility, right?
Yeah.
That's also a part of this to me, is accepting that you can hurt people. And if you do, how do you repair that? How do you restore trust? You know, and it's about like all the people that I'm naming are not the enemy. Like that's what's going on here. And it's like, if you're not the enemy and you're claiming queerness and you're not experiencing harm on the level and danger on the level of certain people of your community, what are you doing? How are you helping? Like, what can you do to rise to the occasion of helping somebody who's terrified of being detained at the airport right now? And I just think of ACT UP. It's like, yes, the people who had AIDS and HIV and were HIV positive and like dying were a part of that group, but it was also people who weren't. It was
Mhm.
people who were like, all the fucking lesbians who were just like, we're here too, go read some Sarah Schulman, please. And it's like,
Go watch the Act Up documentary. Also a great documentary to watch. Like,
yes, yes. And like, what is the one? The plague, had the word plague in it. There's a really great documentary about the AIDS crisis. I'm forgetting what it's called. But I think something that I'm feeling a bit salty about right now is that, like, why is the burden, why is the burden and the labor landing on the people most directly impacted by these laws? Why am I only receiving the most up-to-date advice of what to do from other trans people? Why aren't cis people and people who aren't experiencing this just being like, I'm coming with you. I'm going to help you. And it's sort of like, I understand there's a certain level of like education that needs to happen of like how to care for me. But it's just like the way that identities have been siloed severs the queer energy from of interconnectedness. And like when we are going into like when you're non-binary or versus trans and you create conflict about it, it's like there is no conflict. There's no conflict. It's the word. I don't care about what you call yourself. Help people. I don't want to get in a fight about it. Fucking help people. And that's what's actually bringing me back to the original pride flag. Because I think, it's been distilled into this rainbow. And I'm like, do you know what it stands for? I'm going to pull it up. We got to talk about Gilbert Baker.
yeah, there's also a book about it.
Yeah, I have not read it, but
It was
Gilbert Baker.
edited by one of the original ACT UP members, which is how I heard about it.
I gotta read this. Yes, and I've been actually wanting to claim this term for myself. So, Gilbert Baker was an American artist, designer, activist, and vexillographer, which is flag designer, best
Yes.
known as the creator of the original rainbow flag. And so, I think people perhaps ignorantly think that, like, oh, it just means that everyone's included, or like, um, it's sort of like a manifestation or a visual manifestation of the alphabet soup of our identities,
No, these are all values that are part of our community and how
Yes,
we
and
show up as family for each other.
yes, and this is why I fucking need to one second. I just want to find like what the each of the words or colors stands for.
I also want to say, in response to just like the onslaught of all the different flags now,
Ugh.
what I want is like a rainbow tie-dye flag that just says, we're all in this together. Like,
Yes. So
liberation is about everyone. It's about people in Palestine. It's about people, being exploited anywhere where there is no liberation. That is where our love needs to flow, because none of us is free till we're all free.
Right. And what's hilarious to me is that cis people are the least fucking free. You know what I mean?
That's so true. Yes, they are absolutely the least free amongst us.
Yes. I don't want what cis people have. I don't. That is not freedom to me. And
even as right now, under the dump second administration, they have more, quote, freedom to travel. Like,
right.
Still don't want what they have.
I know. Okay, so Gilbert Baker's flag. Let's talk about it for a moment. Gilbert Baker created the original pride flag in 1978. Baker was urged by Harvey Milk to create a symbol for the LGBT community, and he chose a flag, which he saw as the most powerful symbol of pride. Baker saw, this is coming back to color and light, my friend.
Yes.
Yes. Baker saw the rainbow as a natural flag from the sky. So he adopted 8 colors for the stripes, each with its own meaning. Hot pink for sex, red for life, orange for healing, yellow for sunlight, which to me is life also.
Yeah.
All of it's life. Sex is life.
Mm-hmm.
Sunlight is life. Green for nature. Nature is life. Turquoise for art. Art is life. Indigo for harmony. Harmony is life. And violet for spirit, which is also life. And it's like, it's a flag that represents life. Like,
yes,
it's not about who you have sex with. Like, that's one stripe of it. And
yes.
it's just saying sex. It's not saying gay sex. Like, and it
implies.
What did you say?
It implies.
I know. Okay. But like,
but also I want to say I don't want to have sex like heterosexuals either. They have a boring sex life. Queer people have the Cheesecake Factory menu of what is available to them. Like heterosexuals have like a bougie, like limited, like whatever pre-fee menu. It is just 3 things, right? Anyway.
Right. And well, so the Cheesecake Factory menu, I also just want like somebody's random napkin stuffed in there with another like random idea. It's like
you're not
a
limited.
strip of paper of like someone's imagined thing that they tried once that you're like, maybe you might like that. I don't know. Like
Post-it note on the appetizers to add like dinner. Listen, there's so much, and I love that you brought it to life, and I love that you brought it to light and color, and I think that's it. Like the best thing we can do in the world is to just bring more light and color to it. And again, by listening, by being compassionate and loving and leaning out for liberation for all people.
100%. And it's like, I think that boils back down to integrity too. It's like, I don't know. It's like when you're putting on non-binary, are you looking up the original pride flag and like wondering where that came from, or like why these flags exist? I don't know. There's it's like getting back to the root of like, and with integrity too, it's like, I think when I say to people like, have you read anything about queerness? Like there's like this halting feeling of like, I have not read any queer theory. And I'm like, I'm not even saying that. Like, have you read Stone Butch Blues? Have you read, like, I don't know.
Have you read A Queer and Pleasant Danger? The Kate Side memoir? So good.
Yeah. And it's like, have you read anything, like any novels by Sarah Schulman from back in the day? Like,
Audre Lorde.
Right. Yes. Oh my God. Completely.
Yes. Angela Davis.
Yes.
Oh, we need it. AP, we gotta wrap.
Sorry. Chatty. So chatty.
You know what? We're both chatty, and I love it for us, and I love it for everyone who is giving us their time, treasure, and talent in these moments. Do you have any parting words for our besties out in the audience?
Oh my God. Something that the Akasha said to me this last year was rise to the occasion of being alive. rise to the occasion of being alive. What is that? What is life to you? How are you choosing to live your life? It doesn't just happen to you. It doesn't. And I think that's what queerness is about, right? It's about choosing the life that you want to live.
Yeah. I have a new affirmation that is my life is for me.
Yes.
Yeah. And in these times, I think claiming our lives is so, so, so revolutionary. AP, thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much, Bevan, for having me on your podcast.
Oh, I love you so much.
I love you too.